from the Herbert I. Greenberg Studios at WHIG, it's Up Late with Sam Bass.
Thank you, Scott Smith, and welcome to Up Late with Sam Bass. Let me also thank our green room sponsor, Serpro of Rocky Mount Tarboro, and as well, Allegra Print of Rocky Mount. I mean, look at this backdrop we have now. Gone is the black curtain. So now we have this beautiful Rocky Mount cityscape behind us. So to my good friends over there, Todd, Aaron, Melissa, you guys are doing a great job. You're not only doing a great job for us, you just do a great job in the community. We really appreciate you guys. We now have twice the set that we had before. So the other WHIG hosts are twice as jealous as they were before. And our episode tonight is going to be twice as long. So that's all good. It's all wins for me, and that's what's important. But back to the green room a minute. We have a very special episode tonight. The person waiting in the Serpro green room is a name that I promise you'll recognize. I get told a lot of point, but I'm sorry. I'm making a point here. The name you're going to recognize is the one and only Greg Fishel. Yes, waiting in our Serpro green room tonight is the fish himself. So you might remember Greg as being the WRAL's chief meteorologist for a long time, but he's also a very avid enthusiast who really knows his stuff about science. I can't wait to find out more about him. I do want to tell you, one Halloween, my daughter and some of her friends, they went to the State Fair in Raleigh, and they came back with these Greg Fishel masks. And they all dressed up and went trick-or-treating as Greg Fishel. How scary is that, right? So I believe we've got a pick. Speaking of my daughter, I got a short story here. My daughter actually managed to get herself thrown out of a party. Right, folks, the apple does not fall far from the tree here. It's a short story, but she was at an engagement party for a friend. Next to them, there was a wedding reception was going on, and the people in the wedding reception were bleeding into their party, eating their food, drinking their drinks, etc. So my daughter figured they'd get back at them and go take one of her friends, go next door and kind of crash their little party. So they're over there having a drink, probably suggested by a couple of earlier drinks, and over there having a pretty good time. All of a sudden, the groom walks up and says, "Hey, I don't know you guys. You know, who do you think you are? Get out of our party." My daughter pops up and says, "Hey, I don't think you know who I am. My dad is Sam Bass of Up Late with Sam Bass." Of course, that didn't carry any weight up there. Maybe if she'd have said, "Hey, I know Greg Fishel," that might have worked, but my name didn't carry any weight. So anyway, since it is close to Halloween, I do have a top 5 list tonight. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. These are the top 5 most misguided Halloween costumes. Okay? It's always top 5 because it's about half as good as the top 10. So, number 5, human popsicle. Let's face it, folks, this man he seems to freeze up a lot. Number 4, a non-intelligent life form. Wait a minute. How'd that get in there? I think John Check has been in here. Jamie, what is going on with John Check? All right. Number 3, and speaking of non-intelligent life forms, here's the next one. This is actually one of those costumes designed for couples. Dumb and Dumber. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. So you remember that trial they had about a year ago, crazy, both of them look like total monsters. It's just proof that fame and money does not buy class. Number 2, Humpty Dumpty. I'm sorry, this may be in poor taste, but this man seems to be falling down a lot and he can't get up. And here it is. The number 1 most misguided Halloween costume is, and it's my personal number 1 as well, human Ambien. also known as a friend of mine. It's John Chat. He may not be a drug himself, but he sure puts me to sleep. So we'll be right back, but I want to ask you a question. Do you think the real Greg Fishel will actually be here? Find out next.
When you're the leader in disaster cleanup and restoration, how do you make like it never even happened happen? Let it rain, Randy! Woo! Yes! By being prepared for anything! Woo! Whatever comes your way, there's a pro for that.
Serve Pro, like it never even happened.
Welcome back. I'm sitting here with a person, and I want to ask you a question. Are you the real Greg Fishel?
Yes.
It's him, here in person. Son of a gun, the official Greg Fishel, everybody. Thank you so much for taking your time to come to Rocky Mount.
Oh, this is fun. Should I mention that I've been here many times before?
Well, I was going to ask you, I know it's not your first visit.
Right.
So you were involved with a chaperone for a band camp. Tell me about it.
Athens Drive High School. My son, Austin, was in the band his junior and senior year. And so I volunteered to be a chaperone those 2 years, and I had such a good time. I did it 6 more after my son had graduated.
Wow.
And so spent a lot of time over here, I guess, usually late July, early August, somewhere in there. And got to know the cafeteria staff, and we just always had a blast. It was just a great time.
I'm glad you were able to come back and visit with us.
Absolutely.
So we all know about your days, chief meteorologist, WRAL, for a long time. So what are you up to these days?
Well, the weather-related thing that I'm doing is something called Patreon. It's like patron with an E, Patreon. And basically what I've done is set up a subscription service where I do one weather video a day, talking about the weather for central and eastern North Carolina, same area that I covered when I was on television. Right. And so that's $3 a month. And then if you want to spend $5 a month, then I provide 3 additional weather education videos per week. And so we're at about 700 and some subscribers right now, and obviously always looking for more.
Right.
But it's been fun because, and you know, the one thing I really like about it, and this is not a criticism of WRAL or TV in general, but TV stations have time constraints. You know, each segment has a certain amount of time. So if I was at 3 minutes, it was not uncommon for the person standing next to the camera to go like this, like, you know, shut up. So now, being a one-man band, I can go as long as I want.
Take all the time you need, right?
That's right.
I'm going to tell you, I subscribe to it, and I really enjoy it.
Thank you.
You're like a little head down there in the bottom of my screen, and then I got this big old weather forecast. But it takes me back to those great days, man, when you were at RL, and you could really get into the science of it, which is really fascinating to me and a lot of people. And so I've really enjoyed that. And so I appreciate it. And folks, I recommend to get on this site and sign up for it. It's worth it. I'm telling you, Patreon is the company, right?
Yeah, patreon.com and then /fishweather.
There you go.
All one word.
And it comes up and it says, O with a fish shell.
Right.
Forecast. So also, tell me about Blanton's. I love Blanton's. It's great bourbon.
No, they contacted me. Will did.
Not that Blanton's.
Not that Blanton, okay. Exactly. Although I was going to ask you, do you have proof?
Anyway, 85 proof.
There you go. No, Will Blanton, the CEO, contacted me through LinkedIn and talked to me about being the company spokesperson, and I thought it would be a good fit. Air conditioning, weather.
Oh, makes sense.
And so they've been great. They've invited me to all of their company meetings. They have quarterly meetings in Fayetteville, and it's a great company, great bunch of people. I really enjoy working with them.
So let's get back to the weather a little bit.
Sure.
So you didn't just report it, you kind of explained the science behind it.
Try to.
And you went to school for it at Penn State, correct?
Right.
So what made you get to the point where, hey, I want to be a meteorologist? Or was there a point in your life that caused that to happen?
Yeah, it came in stages. I mean, when I was a young boy, I loved snow and was petrified of thunderstorms. If there was a tornado watch, not a warning, but a watch,
Right.
I assumed there was going to be one tornado, it was going to be bad, and it was coming right for my house. There was no doubt in my mind. And then when I was in 6th grade, I was channel surfing, which back in that day did not take long. And I stumbled upon a public TV show that was produced at Penn State. And it was called The State of the Weather, the Shape of the World. And it was a 15-minute show. First 7.5 minutes was a meteorologist not only talking about the forecast for the state of Pennsylvania, but the science behind the forecast. And I started watching this religiously, and one of the guys that did it is the main reason I got into meteorology. He was my inspiration. His name was Elliot Abrams. He was one of the senior vice presidents of AccuWeather. And so my parents were tickled to death I was interested in anything. And so my mom took me up to Penn State, I think when I was a sophomore in high school, to meet the professors and find out what the course requirements were and all that. And it was in-state tuition, which they loved.
Right. I understand that.
And now the TV part was a total accident. I had never pictured myself on television. That just was something that happened to fall into place.
You were so natural on TV. People loved you and still do love you. But you were at RAL for like 40 years, correct?
Almost 37, yeah.
Yeah. So when did you start working there? How old were you?
I was 24. It was June of 1981.
Wow. That's very young. You know,
Yes.
if you think about it, I remember you coming on there. So I want to do something. Since you were there for so long, I want to throw out some names and get your take on some folks.
Okay.
We're going to go back a few years here.
All right.
Of course, the first one's going to be Charlie Gaddy.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about your relationship with Charlie.
Charlie, by the way, is still alive. And I visit him routinely.
He's got to be close to 90, maybe?
92, yeah. If I'm remembering correctly. But the thing I will always remember about Charlie was that shortly after I started, they had me do a story. And I didn't do too many stories in my time there, but it was, I think it was about wood stoves or something like that. And I didn't know what I was doing, and it was not in his job description to help me. And he saw that I was struggling, and he, out of the goodness of his heart, walked over and basically got me through that process. And that's the kind of man he was and is that he just likes to help people wherever he sees the need for it. And we had many talks over the years about virtually everything. And just a class man.
Well, you know, he always seemed to be so nice on TV.
Yep.
And I know somebody may seem to be nice on TV and they're not really nice in person like you are. I'm not nice in person. I am. Everybody in this room will vouch for me. There's nobody in here, but they will. Okay, another name.
Yeah.
And I want to know if you can even spell Bob DeBardeleben.
DeBardelaben.
You won a prize for that. Tell me about Bob. Now, he was a weather man.
Yes.
Right.
And I met him, the first time I met him was on an interview during the weekend of the Duke Children's Classic, way back in the day. And the thing that worried me was that I knew what a legend he was. And I'm sitting there thinking, if they love him and my style is entirely different, they're going to run me out of town. And I think the thing that saved me was that he was so supportive of me that I think maybe a lot of people said, well, if Bob thinks this guy's okay, we'll give him a chance.
There you go.
And so he and I worked together for 8 years, and he had a great relationship with the local National Weather Service office where they would talk every night at like 11:15 before the news. And he learned a lot about meteorology just from his conversations with them. So he was, by the time he was in his prime, he was not just, reading words. He actually knew some stuff about what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And
I guess like it's kind of like Al Roker is now.
right,
I don't think he's a meteorologist, but
right.
he seems to know a lot because he's done it a long time.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't do anything that long without learning something along the way.
All right, I'm going to move to the sports department.
Yeah.
Now, I don't even know if this guy was there when you were there. Nick Pond, do you remember him?
Yes, he was not a sportscaster anymore, but he had moved up into the corporate part of the company, so I met him through that.
Okay. And then I think between Nick Pond and the next guy, there was Rich Brennan.
Yep, Rich Brenner, yep.
Is it Brenner?
Brenner, right.
Okay. And then Tom Suter, who's from Rocky Mount.
Right.
Who was there a pretty good while. Probably most of the time you were there, I would think Tom Suter was there.
I think he got the job, officially got the full-time job, I think in, I think it was 1980, I'm sorry, it would have been 81, because when I interviewed, he was still, he worked something like 80 days in a row because they hadn't hired a replacement and they were looking elsewhere. And then they finally decided after all that time that we've got the best person here already. Mm-hmm. And so they gave him the job, and he and I used to have some fun. Like sometimes I would sit in his chair during the sports tees and I would give an update on the Mets. I'm a huge Mets fan. And then he would come over and push me out and say, "Get out of here." So we had a good time.
Yeah, that team back in those days, you guys were just great. I mean, it's just like you were family almost.
Right.
Speaking of Tom Suter.
Yep.
I always wondered about this. Adele Arakawa.
Right.
They were always real flirty on the air. What's your take?
To my knowledge, nothing was going on.
Okay.
Absolutely nothing. But I mean, Tom was just that kind of a guy. I mean, he was very fun-loving and could come across as flirtatious, but Tom's standards regarding life are about as high as they get. They really are.
I'm going to have to run him down and get him on this show. I mean,
you should.
I don't know if he's in Rocky Mount or not, but I really need to get him.
He's in Raleigh, but I mean, he and I have dinner together every now and then.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting. I actually played a role in him meeting his wife. She used to go to the same gym that I went to, and so I invited her to come by the station one night and watch the newscast. And unbeknownst to me, she had this huge crush on Tom. And so I introduced them, up after the newscast, and rest is history.
Wow. Matchmaker Greg Fishel. Okay, I'm going way back on this one. I don't even know if you know this name. Dick Ellis.
Oh my gosh. It sounds familiar, but I don't think I ever met the person.
The only reason I mentioned Dick Ellis, I know he was in weather. He was once at WITN in Little Washington.
Okay.
And he played Whitney the Hobo. They had a kids show called Whitney the Hobo when I was a kid.
Okay.
And Dick Ellis was the guy. He ended up at WRAL.
Okay.
I only know that because one year I drove Bobby Batista in the Wilson Christmas Parade. She was the Grand Marshal.
Okay.
And people were hollering, "How's Dick Ellis doing?" And she knew him.
Okay.
So you don't know him. That's okay. All right, Deborah Morgan.
Oh, gosh. You talk about how some people seem nice on TV, but they're maybe not in real life.
Right.
With Deborah, what you see on TV is exactly what you get off the air. Just one of the most genuinely nice people I've ever met in my life.
Well, I mentioned the State Fair earlier. We had gone up there one year when Deborah Morgan was in the WRAL tent, and my daughter was probably 12 or 13 years old, and she took a lot of time to talk to her. And she came across exactly like you're saying, super nice and very genuine.
Yep. Yeah,
So
she was great to work with, and again, was much more than just a colleague. It's like, we again had talks about a lot of things over the years, and I just have always valued that relationship.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move on. Donna Gregory.
Yep. About as fun-loving a person as I've ever met in the industry. And she and I still keep in touch. She's on TV in Wilmington now.
Yeah, I think I follow her on Facebook. I still see her from time to time on there.
Right. And there was one time recently, a couple of years ago, I guess, that we had dinner. We were sitting outside, and she took my phone and posted to Facebook like I was posting about her. And the caption was, "Isn't she still amazing after all these years?" And that's Deborah, you know.
You never leave your Facebook open at your desk. You know, I've had that happen to me before, so I understand that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about somebody else here. I was at the beach, and we were at a restaurant down there, and this guy walked into the restaurant. I mean, you'd have thought Elvis Presley walked in.
Oh, geez.
Everybody was like, you know, let me buy you a drink. David Crabtree.
Yes, yes. David, I would say that David and Gerald Owens are the two people I have kept in closest touch with since I've left. And David is one of those guys where I could have a fun-loving conversation with him 1 minute, and then on a dime turn and have the most serious conversation you'd ever have. And he and I think, had very similar philosophies about news, that he wanted to report the news and then let the consumer decide how they felt about it, instead of trying to coerce them into agreeing with his point of view on it. And I always greatly respected that. And he was always willing to learn, and he was always willing to be wrong.
But you know, the thing about him is, when I think Charlie Gaddy probably handpicked him as his successor.
He certainly played a role, yes. Yes.
And he reminded me a lot of Charlie Gaddy.
Mm-hmm.
Their mannerisms, something about him.
Yep.
Yeah. So you did mention Gerald Owens. What is he, like 7'5"?
Not quite that tall, but the thing about it is, he's a hugger like I am. So every time we see each other, I can't get my arms around this guy. He is just and the thing about, I mean, it's not fat. I mean, he's just a solid big guy, you know. But yeah, he and his wife, I've been, you know, to their house several times, and he's just a very, very good friend.
Okay, so we've got a couple of the WRL people that went on to bigger things.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is the late Bobby Batista.
Yes.
Did you work with her?
Only when I filled in for Bob.
Okay.
When he was on vacation, then I would do the late news, and she and I would work.
She went on to CNN. She
Yes.
was like the first one that ever got the big break.
Yep, exactly. So I didn't know her well, but we had I think it was a 40th anniversary show. I can't remember when that was, but anyways, she and Charlie and Tom anchored the news. And so I got a chance to, talk to her then and sort of reminisce about, the old times. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't know her well, but every time we, worked together, everything went fine. So.
Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned, I drove her on a Christmas parade one year.
Oh, okay.
And she was, everybody loved her.
Yep.
And she was about 5'2".
Right.
At the highest. Okay, another one went to CBS, Jim Axelrod.
Oh,
Did
gosh.
you work with him?
Yes, and it's funny. I go to New York once a year, mainly to see Mets games, and I've tried to get up with him a couple of times, and they just keep him so busy. But we at least correspond, and again, just as a solid reporter, but also just a heck of a nice guy.
The last one I'm going to talk about, and he's probably done the most of any of them, is Brett Baer. Mm-hmm. He's like the main anchor at Fox News now.
Yes.
Did you work with Brett?
Yes, I did, and I hope he doesn't kill me for telling this story, but there's a sports bar behind the station, and one Halloween, he came dressed as a cow, and there were like lots and lots of udders. And
that's pretty good.
And I don't know why that memory will always stick in my mind. But again, a fun-loving person. But when it's time to get serious, he does a great job.
I remember one time when he was still at WRAL, they were doing hurricane coverage. He was on the beach, just him by himself with the camera. So he'd set the camera up and he'd run behind it.
Yes.
And they had him on Regis and Kathy Lee.
Right.
One of those, I think, maybe Kathy or Kelly, one of the ones.
Right.
And they were talking to him live on there, and you're talking about, and I was thinking, hey, this guy's from Channel 5.
And I think the photographer had to go to the restroom or something, and so they came to him, and it's like the photographer's not there, so he becomes a one-man band at that point.
He's really good. I really enjoy him on Fox.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to move on from the WRL talk. And I want to talk about your official weathercast that you're doing now. Again, tell everybody how they can watch it, what it's about, what you do, that kind of thing.
Well, the website, if you type in Patreon, Patreon.com, and then a / and then all one word, Fishweather, FISHWEATHER. Then you'll get a welcome video that'll explain basically what I do. So it's a forecast for the same area that I covered with WRAL, but it's longer. It's usually like 6, 7, sometimes 8 minutes long. And I do the forecast at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. So if you're not interested in all the other stuff, you get the forecast, shut it off,
right.
It's Miller time, whatever. But if you do, then it's there. And then, so that goes Monday through Friday. And then if the weather's crazy over the weekend, I'll do special stuff. Mm-hmm. And then for an extra, that's $3 a month. For $5 a month, I do a really deep dive into the science Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And like the other day, I did an update on El Nino. I did one which was probably a little bit too math intensive, but I actually showed equations as to how to calculate the sunrise and the sunset for any given location. So for people that are really nerdy, that's there for them. But if you basically just want some basic information, that's there too.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy it. I watch it almost every night.
Okay.
I especially enjoyed the update you did last night that you wouldn't be on because you had an evening engagement in Rocky Mount. That was my favorite one. So,
and people are very understanding. It's like I sometimes feel guilty, like if I want to take a day off or something like that, and there's been overwhelming support. People say, look, nobody works 365 days a year. If you want to take a day off, take a day off.
Right.
So I just got to take them up on it.
Yeah. So let me ask you, so I actually recently heard your podcast, the Carry podcast.
Yeah.
And you said that your goal was never to be one of the most recognized people in the triangle.
No.
But you failed miserably on that, by the way. But I'm trying to be. No, I'm not. I'm already one of the most recognized people in Rocky Mount, which is not that big a deal, actually. So the other thing you talked about, I heard on that podcast, that you got defensive sometime when somebody would come up to you and say, hey, you get paid pretty good money to be right half the time.
Right.
Have you ever slugged anybody or
no,
gotten violent?
There were times I got defensive and like, that's not true or whatever. And now it's gotten to the point now where if somebody says that, I just smile and say, hey, it's good work if you can get it.
That's right. But one other thing I want to touch on, and this is a real touchy subject.
Sure.
At one time, you were a climate change skeptic.
Big time.
But you're no longer a skeptic now, right?
Mm-hmm. Nope.
What caused you to change your mind on that?
I woke up one morning, and I joke about the fact that in of itself that was a good thing. And I realized that I was allowing my political ideology at the time to dictate my opinion about a science issue. Mm-hmm. And that ideologies and science really don't mix. I approach weather forecasting like a scientist, and so why was I not approaching another science issue like a scientist? But I will tell you that I'm upset about the political division in this country in general.
Right.
Climate change is just one example of how this has become a political football. And there are sometimes the people that agree with me on the science annoy the daylights out of me because of the way that they express their opinion. Mm-hmm. For instance, every time there's an unusual weather event, there's this immediate attribution to man-made climate change. Well, you know what? There's been weird weather going on since time began. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge is to take the natural variability in the climate, which occurs on its own, take that out and then see what you have left, okay? And really the only thing that makes these changes unique, because I always tell people, you're right, the climate's always changed. Mm-hmm. There's been more CO2 in the air than there is now. It's been warmer than it is now. All that stuff's true. The only thing that makes this unique is that we're seeing these changes occur over a much shorter time period than we can document in any one of a number of ways. And there's a professor, and I'll stop at this, professor at MIT, and I love his approach to it. He said it all comes down to risk assessment. And we all know what that is. So he said, if we can minimize the risk without hurting people, why couldn't we all agree on that? And I like that approach because it's not we're all going to die tomorrow, and it's not we can do whatever the heck we want and God will save us. It's a nice middle ground, responsible approach.
Well, that makes sense. I've kind of always been a person that didn't buy all the way into it as far as it being man-made more than natural. And you always hear about El Nino and La Nina and all that.
Right.
That has effects on the weather.
Sure.
Of course, I'm not anywhere in your league on that stuff, but I just don't, the carbon part of it, the carbon footprint, and going to electric cars, I don't think all electric is a good idea. But, who knows the answers?
Well, and again, it's one of those things where I think if we stop treating this like I have a team and you have a team, and if you're not on my team, I hate you.
Right.
There's a lot of issues where if we could sit down and compare notes, there might be a third solution or a third approach that neither side had thought of yet, and that both sides would get a little bit of what they're looking for. And that's what I think is missing right now in our society, is that, we were talking about this off air earlier, that we've allowed cable news channels, talk radio, and social media to divide us.
Right.
And my mother, can I tell a quick story about my mom?
Sure.
My mom was not a Richard Nixon fan at all, even prior to Watergate, okay? So I'm 13 years old. On a Saturday afternoon, she comes up to me and says, do you want to go up to the airport with me? Nixon's flying in to give a speech. And I looked at her and I said, wait a minute, isn't that the guy you don't like? And she looked at me and said, he's our president and he deserves our respect. How many people do you know think like that now?
Well, they used to.
Right.
In today's world, they don't.
No.
So have you ever thought about getting into politics?
No.
You sound like a good politician there. Get right in the middle, man. Get all those votes.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly willing to speak about my ideal situation, but I think it's one of those things where invariably, somebody would make a comment about something or, make something up or whatever, and it's like, at this stage of my life, I don't have time for that,
Right.
But I do have a really strong opinions about how we can get back to being a true democracy.
Right.
Well,
Well, we definitely need help.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's really bad. So we're going to move on a little bit. I want to ask you about one incident in particular.
Okay.
Snowmageddon.
Oh.
It's like the entire country was laughing at us.
Oh, yes. And do you know what? I didn't completely understand the science behind what happened until after it was over. And I was at a conference and talked to somebody who knew a lot about this. But we had gone for a few flurries, and it flurried just hard enough to start dusting the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so people, because I think this was like a few years after the 20-incher, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is the start of another one. So they all get out around noontime, and it had been very cold for a few days, so the ground was frozen. And the tires, exerting pressure on this powdery snow, melted it, and then the cold ground immediately refroze it from underneath. And so human activity transformed this innocent powdery snow into an ice skating rink. And then all of a sudden you've got teachers and kids stranded at schools, and people 8 hours to get home, all for 0.7 inches of snow.
It was crazy.
And it was a very unique set of circumstances that led to that. And I'm not sure the people that were laughing at us completely understood the science as to what happened,
Right.
But no, that was, I don't think, if that ever happens again, I doubt seriously that I could predict it, because it was such a unique situation.
Well, see, people up north always laugh at us because we close the schools
Right.
anytime it snows, but they don't realize we don't have the equipment here
Right.
to clear the roads.
Yep.
And so we have to close. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to buy the equipment. We don't have that much snow.
Right. Do you remember the original airport movie with Burt Lancaster
Yeah.
and George Kennedy?
Don't call me Shirley.
Right. Yes. Well, no, that was Airplane.
Airplane.
Yeah.
Okay.
Airport was actually somewhat serious,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But
Airplane better.
I think George Kennedy was in charge of clearing the airport of snow and ice and all that. And Burt Lancaster, looked at him and said, "So what are your plans to, get the airport back open?" And he said, "Well," I just think we'll wait until spring and the snow melts." He said, "What the heck do you think we're doing about it?"
Yeah. So since we're talking about snow, have you looked at the winter forecast for this year for snow? I know you're a snow lover.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, and this is going to sound like I'm dodging you here. We're definitely headed into an El Nino, and El Ninos are associated with cooler and wetter conditions in the southeast.
All right.
But all El Ninos are not created equal. And there have been years with El Ninos where I was so optimistic about getting snow, and it turned out to be wet, but mild.
Right.
And so, it's one of those things where it's variations on a theme. They're not all created equal. So I would say that our chances are better than they've been the last 3 years, but that's no guarantee.
Yeah. Well, we'll take it. I like snow myself, so maybe we'll get some.
I get your drift.
So we're going to move on. I want to talk about hurricanes a minute.
Okay.
Not the Carolina hurricanes. We might
Right.
get to that, though.
Okay.
So you've covered a lot of hurricanes.
Right.
And so during the course of your career, have you ever been in fear for your own personal safety while covering one?
Not for my life, but the one I'll always remember is Fran. And
That was a bad one.
this was a very embarrassing moment for me. My wife called me after the 11 o'clock newscast and said, "Have you actually stepped outside to see how bad this is?" And I said, "Not really." I said, "I'm just looking at data, observations." And she said, "You need to go outside." And I did. And I saw transformers blowing and trees coming down. And I ran in and got Jim Payne, who was an anchor with me at that time.
He just retired, right?
Yes. And in fact, I went down for his retirement in Orlando. But anyway, I said, "Jim, you got to come out here." And so he comes out here, and I embellished the story a little bit by saying that we had this magical moment where we looked in each other's eyes and said, "We need to go on the air from out here." And so we did hourly updates from this breezeway that connects the two main buildings on the campus. And what we didn't realize was how many people didn't have power. So if you didn't have a battery-powered radio or a battery-powered TV, you couldn't watch us, But my glasses blew off and went down this stairway toward the WRL Gardens, and I'm blind as a bat without my glasses. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I'll never find them. And I just kept reaching around with my hand, and by the grace of God, I found them. And but I wasn't, scared that I was going to die or anything like that. But I was certainly, that was the closest I've come to experiencing the fury of a hurricane. And by the time it got to Raleigh, it was a Cat 1. So I have no clue what a Cat 4 or a Cat 5 is like.
Yeah, Fran was scary. I remember thinking, my house is going to just implode. It just, the winds were so hard, and I had never experienced anything like that. It was really scary.
And do you know that there was a professor in the Department of Forestry at NC State that taught me something about that storm? He said the soil type that we have in that part of North Carolina is a very clay-like soil, and it takes on the consistency of a pancake batter when it's wet. So he said, if you blow 60-mile-an-hour winds for 8 hours on trees sitting in pancake batter, they're going to go down. And I don't know if you remember this, you probably do, is that most of the trees that were down, you could see the root ball.
Right.
They weren't snapped off. The whole root,
They were just
right,
sucked up out of the ground,
you know,
roots and all. It's crazy.
It really was.
So one of the other things I wanted to ask you, you hear the term lake effect.
Yeah.
What does that really mean?
Well, like for instance, Buffalo is on the eastern end of Lake Erie. And so the water temperature of the lakes cools down much, much more slowly than the air temperature does in the fall. And so the first cold outbreak that comes along, you have this really cold air going over top of this really warm water, or relatively warm water, and you get what we call a very steep lapse rate of temperature. And so it's really the same principle as getting a thunderstorm going. The steeper the lapse rate, the stronger the thunderstorm is. And so the wind, when it's from the southwest, blows the whole length of Lake Erie. And then when it gets to the end where Buffalo is, it dumps all of that in the form of snow. And Jim Goodman, the CEO of Capital Broadcasting, sent me up there for an event a few years ago, well, more than a few now, where the suburbs south of Buffalo got 80 inches in 3 days. And so we went up there to cover it, and there were people on their roof shoveling snow off their roof for fear that the roof was going to collapse.
That is crazy.
And you could be in a band where it's snowing 5 inches an hour with thunder and lightning. You go 10 miles down the road, either direction, stars are out.
Wow.
It's an amazing phenomenon.
So of all the things you know about weather, is there one thing that still you don't understand or maybe fascinates you, or that just you just can't get, you just can't wrap your mind around?
I would say, just in general, there's always new things to learn. And I think the key, and I think this applies to life in general, if something doesn't go the way you think it was going to go, care enough about the mistake to go back and study it.
Mm-hmm.
If you simply take the attitude that, oh, well, I'm human, I make mistakes, I'm going to move on, you're destined to make the same mistake again.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what I've learned about weather forecasting have been from the times I wasn't right. And I went back and looked at it and said, that makes more sense now. Hopefully I won't make that same mistake the next time.
That makes a lot of sense. So I got a random question from one of our viewers.
Okay.
Gentleman by the name of Ronnie Tharrington.
Okay.
He's a friend of the show. He wants to know if there's ever any chance that you might return to a TV station one day.
I don't think so. I'm just being brutally honest there.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I've been doing this one-man band thing for a while, and also the broadcast industry, I think, has changed a lot. Like this branding that goes on, like where every weather center has its own nickname now.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like, if I'm doing it myself, then I get to dictate how it's presented, without all the hype and the embellishment.
Right.
And I quite frankly like that. It's like, I'm not sure I want, at this stage of my life, somebody telling me to do something that I'm not comfortable doing.
Right. I can understand that.
Now the pay's not as good.
Well,
but sometimes you gotta just be happy with what you're doing.
So you made me think about something. Going back to, I was listening to some of the people, the old WRAL days. The current weather crew.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure you work with Mike Mays and Elizabeth Gardner.
Yep.
Are those the only two you work with, or were there
And
others?
Amy Wilmoth,
Okay.
who is the weather producer. She's basically in charge of a lot of the content of what goes on. But those are I guess the only three remaining that I actually work with.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watch, everybody does a great job. There isn't a weak link in there. And Mike, I loved our approach when we worked together. We would both prepare our forecasts independently of each other. And then about 3 or 3:30, we would get together and compare notes. And there were sometimes he noticed things I didn't, and sometimes I noticed things he didn't. And so then we come up with a consensus based on our conversation. But both of us wanted to go through the process of making the forecast independently and not to allow anything else to, influence it, and then have the discussion and share the information.
Well, he seems to be the closest thing to you since you've left that station. It's like he was almost your mentor.
Well,
Or you were his mentor.
No, we had a great relationship. And actually, I first met Mike. I went down to Florida State and gave a talk to the meteorology students. I think it was 1988. And he was a student at Florida State then. So that's when I first met him. And he had a couple of TV jobs after that. And then, we found out he was available, I think it was 1994, and that's when we hired him.
Okay. Well, I got a couple other things. These are more lighthearted things
Okay.
going forward. We're getting off the serious stuff. So this is a true story.
Okay.
our writer producer and our crack research staff assistant, Jamie. You met Jamie.
Okay.
She told me that when she was in middle school, you came and spoke to her school.
Okay.
And they let them start taking autographs, things like that. Well, for time restraints, they, one of the teachers had a great idea. Well, let's just make copies of his autograph.
Right.
And she didn't get one.
Oh, no.
So I think that's worried her every day since then.
Oh, gosh.
And so she wanted to know if there's any possibility that she could get an actual Greg Fishel signed picture tonight.
If you have some pictures, I don't have any with me.
We'll get to this later.
And boy, do I look different there.
Yeah, well, you look good. We'll get that. We'll make sure we get that taken care of here in the next few minutes. So we've talked on our show. We've talked a lot lately about UFOs.
Okay.
So it's a fascinating thing to us. And they always want to blame it on weather balloons.
Right.
So what's your take on the whole UFO weather balloon thing?
Well, I mean, weather balloons are a real thing. I mean, they're launched all over the world at the same time twice a day. So those are all real. In terms of the other, I mean, statistically, the probability of us being the only life anywhere in the entire universe seems to be very, very small.
Right. I agree.
But I guess my only fear is that are some of these sightings explainable, but nobody who has the real answer is there to explain it. But I don't want to rule it out. I mean, it's like if I can't document that it was something other than that, then I don't really feel like I'm entitled to have a strong opinion that no, that's nonsense.
Right.
And I know that sounds wishy-washy, but
well, I think you're the same way a lot of people are. You've seen enough evidence to think that there may be something out there.
Right.
One other thing I want to talk about, your name, Fishel. It fits so good, official, all of that, so catchy. You can come up with a million puns, which I know you like. I've already heard about 20 puns from you tonight. And do you think you would have had the same level of success if you'd have had a different name like Jones or even Bass? I know that's fish related, but not Fishel.
Right.
So what do you think about that?
You know what? Nobody has ever asked me that question, and I've never thought about it, to be honest with you. So congratulations. I don't know. That was something the promotion department thought up and ran with it, and I'm glad it helped. But I honestly don't know. I hope that no matter what my name was, that people watched because they just liked what I was doing. But it's a very interesting question. I mean, sometimes branding is everything.
Exactly. And the Fishel
right
is a neat way to brand it. What do you see yourself doing, say, in 5 years from now? Are you still going to be doing the online weather? Or?
That's the plan. It's one of those things where I'm not quite in the position yet that I can quit everything.
Right.
But hopefully, maybe 4 or 5 years down the road, that'll be the case. But there are no guarantees in life. I mean, like for instance, with Blanton's right now, they obviously feel like I'm, benefiting them, and they're trying to expand into the Raleigh market. But there may come a day where, the numbers show them that, okay, his influence is not as great as it was a few years ago, and time to part ways. I mean, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And I am almost committed now to moving back to somewhere within the Raleigh area next summer.
Okay.
I've realized that when you live someplace 39 years, virtually everybody you care about is there. And I just feel like, the ocean's nice. I'm down at Myrtle Beach now. It's nice to see the ocean every day, but it doesn't make up for the friendships that you can't maintain if you're that far away.
Yeah. I do have another question. I saw something, and we're running out of time here. Did you do a short stint of being an Uber driver?
I still do.
Oh, do you?
Yes. Yes, Uber and Lyft.
That is cool. Now, if I got in an Uber and Greg Fishel was driving, I think I'd just freak out. You're doing that in Myrtle Beach.
Yes. Now, most people in Myrtle have no idea who I am.
Right.
But during the summer months, when there's a lot of tourists, that come down from Raleigh and Rocky Mount, other places, then it'll happen a little bit, more often.
That's got to be just a major weird thing, getting in and Greg Fishel's driving your car. So I've got my last question, which is a random interview question. And our friendship could hinge on this very question.
Oh, no. Pressure.
Okay. Are you or have you ever played pickleball?
No.
Yes. See, that's the answer I wanted.
But that doesn't mean that I'm against it.
Okay, well, I'm against it.
Okay.
So I'm really glad to hear that you don't play it, because I've got almost like Brian Schrader had the anti-snow league or
right.
whatever. I've got the anti-pickleball league going over here. I don't really have a problem with it. Not really, but it's just one of those things that is basically playing tennis with a wiffle ball.
Yeah.
And it's for old folks. And we're not old, right?
No, certainly not.
Well, look, Greg, thank you so much. Oh, God. Hey, I'd like to thank my special guest tonight, Greg Fishel. Such a treat to get him on here and have him right here in Rocky Mount. One thing I do want to say is, Alexa, tune in to Sam Bass, Up Late with Sam Bass, every Thursday night going forward. My next guest will be Adrian Copeland, right here in person. Thanks for watching.